Recording in progress. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Streicker Center. Today is our penultimate Women on the Move session for this semester. I am Marjorie Schuster, coordinator of our literary events. Today is a wonderful, wonderful author. Her name is Rachel Barenbaum. This is her second book. We're going to talk about Atomic Anna. Her first book is A Bend in the Stars, which was absolutely terrific. This is her first event speaking about this book because it's being published actually next week. And it's a very, very timely book. We have Jordana Horn moderating today, Jordana of the Call Your Mother podcast on Kveller. As always, please write your questions in the chat feature of Zoom. We will try to get to as many as we can. And it is now my great pleasure to welcome Jordana and welcome Rachel. Hello,
Hi,
Rachel.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm so thrilled to talk to you. And I have to tell the people watching that based on your writing, we are in for a wild intellectual ride this afternoon. This is the first live event in which Rachel will be talking about her newest book, Atomic Anna. And I'd also like to point out that since Rachel often interviews authors herself on her literary podcast, Debut Spotlight with Rachel Barenbaum, she could totally be doing this by herself. So I'm very happy to be here to get a chance to be part of this discussion. Let's on-ramp into this discussion slowly. For the people who are here, who we don't know their reading background, would you mind giving just a quick thumbnail sketch of your novels, both your debut novel, Bend in the Stars, and your newest book, Atomic Anna, coming out next week?
Yeah, Jordana, I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you so much for having me. And hello to everybody. I'm super excited. As you mentioned, this is my first live event for this book. It's coming out soon. So Atomic Anna is the story of 3 generations of Jewish women. It's a grandmother, mother, and daughter. And they work together to build a time machine that they use to stop Chernobyl. It starts at Chernobyl and to save their family. And so there are all kinds of questions in there. And the book goes from what is then the Soviet Union to America and then back across. So, it sort of weaves back and forth. And then A Bend in the Stars starts in 1914 Russia. And it's the story of a Jewish scientist who's racing Einstein to prove relativity. And he goes missing. And his sister, who is one of Russia's first female surgeons, goes after him. And it's the story of love and, again, the family and this question of when do we run? And so why A Bend in the Stars is really set in when do we run, right? And they come to America. Atomic Anna is after they've run, right? And so it takes us into America. And then what happens to the family from there?
Right. That's great. That's almost as though you've done this before. So you did a great job. Both of your novels are, in their ways, deep dives into Russia and into physics and science. And those are subjects that many people might find intimidating. Can you talk a little bit about what led you to writing within those 2 subjects specifically?
Yeah. So I grew up with these great aunts who came to our house almost every Friday night for Shabbat dinner, right? And I was the oldest. And so they would always call me over to the corner. And I loved them very, very much, but they were a little scary. They smelled, like herring, like Manischewitz and, come over here, Rachel, come over. And they would lean over, although they were small, so they didn't, not for long. And they would say, we left Russia, like there was a good reason we left, and we're never going back, but you need to be ready to run. Do you know where the passports are? And do you know where the emergency money is? Because I was the oldest, that was my job. And right, so I heard this all the time. And I would always say, yes, I knew where it was. And I would always look at them and I'd say, but when would I run? Like, what are you talking about? How will I know? And they'd say, you'll know. And then they wouldn't talk about Russia. They wouldn't talk about anything in the past. I wasn't allowed to speak anything but English or French, because that meant that I had arrived, right? I had learned French. Sure. So I sort of always grew up with that. So I've been obsessed with it ever since. And so that's why I start the books there. And in Ukraine, where my family was from, that's sort of the setting that I've always been obsessed with. And as to why science, and right, because I start with these questions from Einstein of relativity, and I'm really obsessed with this question of what is time. And you can look at that from a science side and from a physics perspective, of course. But it really, Einstein started in philosophy, and that's where I started. And that's what I studied in college too, is what is time? This idea of having to track a minute, an hour, a day, right? The moon doesn't keep track of time. The sun doesn't. Why do we keep track of it? And why is it so meaningful? What does it mean to us? And so in Atomic Anna, where I'm ostensibly dealing with time travel and building a time machine, right? There's this question of, can you go forwards and backwards? And I start again talking about Einstein, but it's not really about his equations and his math, right? Because I also don't want to dig into those. I want to dig into the question of why do we care about time, and what can we do if we can travel through it?
Right. But I feel that, okay, there's so many different points that I want to go off on. Just
bring it on.
So yes, we're bringing it on. Okay, so I guess let's start with the idea that that feeling, that where are the passports feeling, it's so interesting to me. And, you know, those of us who are involved in social media, I see that that's not really something that a lot of my non-Jewish or non-first generation American friends really think about too frequently. So there's something deeply Jewish in that idea of, and you mention it, you mention it explicitly in Atomic Anna. There's a moment, I think that it's Daniel and Reza talking and saying this idea of like, yeah, we're okay for now, you know, but we're going to have to go. Can you talk about like how that perspective of being in a place, but not really completely of a place, how that informs your experience as a writer and your perspective on how you write?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a person too, I mean, even we all know what's happening in Ukraine now, and, you know, it's tragic and it's horrible. And yet when it broke out, even my dad called me, right? And he was like, it's time to go to the bank. Make sure you get some money out, right? And get ready. Mm-hmm. And like, you know, Dad, it's okay. We're in America. And he's like, for now, right? So here we are. I mean, I've lived my whole life feeling safe in that sense, right? And my father and my mother, we all have, but I don't know, it's always in the background. And like, I know exactly what you're saying, Jordana. Like I have friends who I've shared this with, you know, and said, and they look at me like I'm crazy, like I'm from outer space, right? Like, what do you mean where your passport always has to be ready to go? And I don't know how to describe it except to say that it's not like a fear or a dread, but it's more like a looking around, like maybe I would leave everything one day. And that's just kind of what might happen. And so I've never really lived any other way. I mean, and when I try to explain it and people look at me like I'm crazy, I don't know how to say to them, but it might happen. And then with everything that's happening in Ukraine, it's like, well, this is exactly what my family's been talking about. That's why they left. That's what, like, my aunt called me and she was like, this is why we left. This is why, you know, this is why you're not allowed to go back and visit there either. It's like that trauma is still there, even though we're generations removed.
For sure. And it's just interesting to me how, yeah, it's epigenetically in it's in me, to the point where, you know, every time I go to the post office to renew my daughter's passports, they're like, where are you going? And I'm like, nowhere yet.
Yes. Yes.
They look at me, I look at them, you know,
yes.
We all just kind of like nod our heads and move on. You know, no, it is not because we are planning an exotic trip. It is because I am a Jew and I have to have a passport. But going back, then I'll go back a little bit to science, and then I want to go off from science to this idea of control of your destiny and how that plays into your work. But going back to Einstein, I understand that you started thinking about Einstein and time after reading a piece in Scientific American. And so I would love for you to go more into that and about whether you've always been, you mentioned college, but whether you've always been an omnivorous reader, or, if it was just like the random Scientific American in a doctor's office that prompted this whole thing.
Oh my God, no. I read all the time, everything I can about everything. I mean, I don't know. I love it. I just love thinking about new ideas, hearing from new people, new perspectives, right? For me, it keeps the world sort of, I don't know, it gives me the perspective of what's around me. I can never read just one thing. So I read Scientific American every month, right? I mean, I get National Geographic, and I read, pretty much anything I can get my hands on. So yes, I'm just I read all the time. And I read that article, and it said, 100 years ago this month, Einstein was just on the verge of proving relativity, but he didn't have his actual physical evidence. This is what inspired A Bend in the Stars, is that he needed to actually get into Russia to take a picture at an eclipse that was coming. And he raised the money, and he sent out a team to go and do it, but then they were stopped at the border because World War I broke out in 1914. And so, I read that and I was like, oh my God, history could have been completely different. Mm-hmm. What if he had made it across and proved relativity earlier? Or what if there was someone in Russia, a Jewish scientist, because that's what I could imagine living there at the time, right, who actually beat Einstein and who discovered and proved relativity before Einstein, because it wasn't a new idea, relativity, and this question of time. Back then, right, we were just opening railroads and stations, and for the first moment in history, clocks needed to be synchronized, right? Because you have to agree what time it is in one country or the other, one city or the other, to run a train schedule. Right. And so that's what Einstein was working on in the patent examiner's office. He was thinking about, how do we synchronize clocks? And he was looking at machines. And so he was thinking about time, and that leads to relativity. And that leads to me to relativity again, right? Why do we care about time? And I actually took a whole class, a philosophy class, where we started off, the professor walked in and asked, what is time? And I've just always thought about that. You hear wasting time, killing time. There are all kinds of expressions about it. And so I really wanted to dig into Einstein's very famous quote of, for physicists like us, he says something to the effect of, there is no difference between the past, present, and the future. We understand that. And I've always taken that as a nod towards time travel. Like, if it's all happening at once, we can choose which band we want to be on, right? If you imagine it as 3 different bands, and you can sort of hop around from one to the other. And then, but time travel has always been a fun trope. It's something I've always loved to think about. But I guess recently, as the world has changed a little more, edging more towards war and violence, I've come to understand time travel is actually a very violent weapon, right? Because in a sense, you go back in time because you have a regret. Maybe you have great intentions. You want to stop Chernobyl, as my characters do in Atomic Anna, right? Anna wants to save thousands, millions of people, hundreds of thousands. But if she goes back, she's going to be erasing lives, and people won't even know. Right? If you jump backwards and then forwards, and if you erased an entire generation, thousands of people, no one knows. That's a weapon. And we don't talk about that. And I think I like to point that out because it really brings us to the larger philosophical question of, just because we can build a weapon like a time machine, and just because we can justify it and say we're going to stop Chernobyl, I mean, then that's a beautiful thing to say. Who could argue with that on the surface? Doesn't mean that you actually should do it, right? Who are you, Anna Barkova, my main character, to decide that the right course of history should be that you go back and change it, right? Who is anybody to decide? And so my characters actually go through these conversations like, oh, well, we could make a panel. We could, we'll come together as, groups, right? The UN type thing, right? We can all decide. And yet, who are all those people to decide who should live and who should die? I mean, it's a real question that I think a lot about in terms of what is our future with science. It's easy to say science is progress, but is progress always good? I mean, look at global warming, right?
Right. And you've touched on so many interesting points there, especially because you talk about the ability to rewrite history. And you really go into this a lot implicitly in Atomic Anna, this idea of rewriting history on both the global scale, literally the global scale, and the small familial scale, talking about our relationships with each other and our regrets. I think it's so interesting that you do it within the context of the Soviet Union and, people who, for a lot of the book, Anna, as a scientist, is rigorously followed and documented and monitored in ways that I don't want to give away spoilers. I mean, these people don't even have access to the book yet, so I'm trying to tread carefully. But in other words, both of these books share not only the common denominators of the ideas of science and of Russia, but also the idea of to what extent we as individuals hold control over our own destinies, and to what extent we're defined by the times in which we live, and by the choices that people have made in generations before us, which I'm sure is something that preoccupies you too.
Yeah. I mean, I think we spend a lot of time thinking through regrets and if I should have done this, or, if only I had done that. But I really try to also work towards an Atomic Anna. Maybe I have a lot of should have, could have, would have, right? But what if I can just look forward, right? Can I repair the damage by looking forward? And that's where I really dig into the family, to the mother-daughter relationships, the grandmother, right, relationships of, I made many mistakes in the past, but I want to change my future. And instead of, it's sort of like an easy way out to say, I'll build a time machine and change it all. But let's, right? If only we could
not
do that.
Easy.
It's not that easy. But right. But that's the point. Is like, actually, if you want a different future, you have to work for it. And you have to be willing to look yourself in the eye, right? Look in the mirror and say to yourself, I made mistakes. And I think for some reason, it's hard for people to say that sometimes. I mean, it's hard for me to say it sometimes, but we have to all sit down and say, I really messed up. I need to get up and apologize. And then I need to find my new path. And that's what I really try to dig into with all three of my characters. There are three generations of Anna, Molly, and Reza, and just really pushing on, how can they find a different way forward?
Yeah. And so telling this book, which really spans practically a century, right? Because you're talking about Anna's mother, Xenia, in 1917, and then you go all the way through these three generations of Jewish women. And it's a very female book. And so yes, I'm thrilled about that. I'm thrilled about that also. So in addition to the fact that we women are the ones who read books, it seems, can you talk about why you chose to tell this story through the lens of women?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for asking that. It's like I had fed you that question, although I didn't.
No, we didn't.
But I love this question because I can talk about one of my favorite things, which is just, I love to read books written by women. I just do. And I love books with women at the heart of them because I mean, I don't know, because maybe I'm looking for myself when I'm reading these books, right? And looking for heroes and characters that I love. And I don't find them enough. And so I find myself writing them. And that's all I can really write. And strong Jewish women. I love to write about that, right? And we're not talking about the religious Jewish woman, or, right? My characters tend to be much more secular, assimilated, questioning, how can I be Jewish and American, right? And whatever else it might be, right? And so I just love to write that and put that in. And it's also what I know is, I know what it is to be a woman and try to balance this idea of, can I have a career and a child? Right? And Anna struggles with that. Molly struggles with that in the book. Like, can you do both? Do you really want both? Like, just, does being a woman mean you have to get married and you have to have a child? And so I that's what I write about. And that's what I put in there. And, I love for people to think about women as scientists, mathematicians, artists, whatever they might be. I like to put them out there.
And I love how you write about it, because frequently I find that contemplation of those ideas is very reductive. It's very much, either this idea that, you become a mother, whether biologically or in another way, and the switch is flipped in you and you are completely redefined as a person. Or on the flip side, people make the choice of, no, that's not for me. I'm going to go completely. And, it's very career and profession based. And yours is not career and profession. It's identity, because the characters in this book, whether it's Molly, who is an artist and is drawing, and she's drawing from a point of view the same way that Anna and Raisa are motivated scientifically. It's who they are as people. And that's regardless of what job or what title they happen to hold. Mm-hmm. And it's inextricable from who they are as humans, yes. So that's as mothers. Yeah. Yes. So you did a great job. You did a great job. That came across very clearly.
Yes. That's like a writer's dream, by the way, that you got it. Thank you.
Well done. And I know that maybe another writer's dream is that I know that I'm not the only one. I know many people who have read A Bend in the Stars, and I feel that it's inevitable with Atomic Anna as well, have seen them as being very cinematic and as being very easy to imagine as films. Is that a possibility? Is that something that you would be willing to explore? Do you want it to just live on the page? How do you feel about that?
No, I mean, it's a dream, right? I would love someone to put it on a screen. And I do have film agents at WME who are working on it. If anyone knows anyone who might be interested,
right, come on, people.
Yeah, come on. But I mean, the truth is, when I write, I see it in my head that way, right? I see these characters in scene. Like I can write about, Molly's desk and, or Anna's, apartment because it's fully realized in my head. And so I think that's really why it comes out on the page as cinematic that way, because I'm writing what I see, where they are. Like they're real to me, right? Anna, Molly, Anna's first love, Yulia, Reza, they're all real people to me. Like people sometimes will say, oh, writing must be lonely. It's like, no, I've got these great friends.
I'm with my friends.
Yeah, they are. They're my buddies. And so I just, I think I really try to bring their worlds to the page. And so that's what you're seeing.
Did you develop a special affection for any of the characters in Atomic Anna as you were writing?
Yeah, I wrote the very last scene with Xenia, which is Anna's mom. I wrote that first. And that's I know that's weird. I've never done that. And I really thought that she was going to be the main character. And I loved her. Yeah. And I just loved her leading this revolution. We don't talk about women who led revolutions or who were part of the Russian Revolution in particular, but they played a huge role. And I really wanted to highlight that. But then as I dug in more and more, I got to know the other characters. So, I sort of fell in love with all of them. And their mistakes too. It's no secret, it's not a spoiler that Molly, the middle generation, is an artist and she becomes, she becomes addicted to drugs and alcohol. She has all kinds of addiction problems. And, but she really is so flawed and yet this big heart. And I fell in love with her struggle to come back from that, right? And to be a mother, to be a person, to find out how she could heal.
Mm-hmm. So she's trying to revise things without the time machine, right? She's trying to do it herself.
Yeah. And that is not easy. They're all in there.
Yeah. And as a follow-up, in terms of Atomic Anna, while it's very easy to imagine it as a movie, I just have to know if you are a fan of WandaVision. Because WandaVision, with its Soviet-era Jewish conflicted heroine / anti-heroine, seems to be like a distant cousin of Molly's comic book art.
Yeah, you're not the first person to say that. That's so funny. It like comes up all the time. So I do love comics very, very much. So I'm going to take this a little bit of a different direction and say that I have actually, one of the amazing things that has come out of this project is I support debut authors all the time. As you mentioned, I have this podcast where I interview new authors. So I also love new artists. Like, I'm obsessed with them. And I've been in touch with a bunch of female comic artists who have been actually drawing some of the comics that Molly envisions. And
love
it's
that.
Amazing. I know. So I'm going to start trickling those out soon. So you'll see I actually have Molly draws comic books when she's young. So I have a younger version by this brilliant artist, Emily Ree. And then I have Angela Wu, who did them a little bit when Molly was older and she's in her 20s and struggling. And so you'll see the different versions of the comic books because, women in comics have not seen their day yet. We are coming. We are building up steam and we are coming. And I talk about Trina Robbins in the book, who was really the leader of the women's comics movement and really pushed that in the beginning. And so I'm also just working with them and trying to get them out there because I love it. I love that art. And I think those women and their voices need to be out there.
That's wonderful. And I feel that also a cousin of the comic books is the graphic novel, which has really experienced a real ascendancy in the public mind. If not, I feel it was always out there, but now it seems like, and younger people too, that it's a very present kind of art form that taps into this idea, like a lot of the ideas that you're playing with and the ideas of conflict between good and evil. I'm thinking of, I'm thinking of The Watchmen, and I'm thinking of this whole variety of work that's coming out in a lot of middle grade fiction also.
Yes.
And what do you think about that? Or are you inclined as a comic book fan, are you inclined to like that or to see it as a different kind of animal?
I love it. I love anyone who's trying to tell a story. Go out there, tell me your story, whatever your, media might be. But comic books in particular. So if you think of a time machine, which is what Anna is trying to build in Atomic Anna, you're looking to build an alternate history. Well, comic books, right? You have all the time, like good Superman, bad Superman, right? Your alternate universes are a huge trope in there. And I love, that's another way to get at this idea of how do we deal with regret, or how do we defeat evil? Or even like the bigger questions that we deal with in philosophy classes, like can good exist without bad? Do you need the dichotomy to define one or the other? So it's easy to say that a comic book or a graphic novel is just a bunch of pictures and people write them off, but it's really another way to get at these very big questions and to show an alternate universe and what else is possible. So I'm a huge fan. I love them. Bring them on.
And I also love your discussion of the evolution of the comic book characters in Atomic Anna and how they change over time. And how that reflects Molly's changes as well as all the changes in the world around, and the idea of changing the focus from revenge to something else. I don't want to.
Yes.
Again, I'm being very deferential to people who I want to have the experience of enjoying your book for the first time themselves. So as long as we're talking comics, I feel that I can ask probably my craziest question.
All right, bring it on.
Okay, so I realize that your books are fiction, even though they do use actual events and people as their starting points. How deep in these ideas did you get? Do you believe, through all of your research, that time travel is actually potentially possible?
So that's a great question. I mean,
it feels a little crazy. I'm not going to lie.
Right. I mean, it's a crazy thing to say, but I feel like I have faith in the human ability to figure things out and,
and to screw things up. Let's not.
I have faith in our ability to screw everything up on a massive scale. So yeah, I think why not? We could, I read this amazing fact in, speaking of all the crazy things that I read a daily digest from Robinhood, which is like a there's Bitcoin, like a cryptocurrency trading app type thing. Okay. Yeah. Robinhood, not the classic.
I'm thinking Disney cartoon, but I've moved. Yes.
No.
Okay.
Cryptocurrency. They put out a daily newsletter. It's really fun. I told you I read all kinds of crazy stuff. And they recently put out this fact that I think it was in the year 2000 was the last year that every human was actually on Earth. And ever since then, at least one has been up in the space station. Right. I know. And I was like, that's a crazy fact, because you think that all humans are on Earth. Of course we're here. We're not, right? It's shifted the way I thought about how close we are to things like living on Mars or living on the moon, right? I don't know. So I'm not going to rule time travel out. I'm going to leave it with that.
Well, I do have to say that one thing that appeals to me as a full disclosure, extremely humanities-based person, one thing that does appeal to me about science, and this is actually where it dovetails with my Judaism and with my being religious, is the humility that is necessary to understand that there's so much that we don't understand, and that there's so much that to us, to the person of today, of 2022, seems utterly unfathomable. Well, I mean, just look at 1922 and how much was how much of our lives would have been unfathomable then. And that's really quite astounding and marvelous. And you've talked about your research process with A Bend in the Stars, but I'd love to hear about what it was like for Atomic Anna, both in terms of Chernobyl and of the Soviet Jewish experience in America.
Yeah. So really, Atomic Anna spans a huge number of years, as you mentioned, right? It's close to 100 years, and a lot changed in that time. And so for me, that was thrilling that I got to really dig into it. I mean, this is like, this is what I like to do, is read about this stuff. So, the book opens with a scene where Molly is building a bomb shelter with her parents that is, sort of dictated from the pages of Life magazine. And they go through and they build it, exactly. This is their sort of guidebook on how to become American. And they're building according to everything they see in there. So I spent a lot of time looking at old magazines, and that's where I got that idea to do that. Because you really get to see the advertisements, what people are writing about. Okay, fine, that's interesting. But also the topics of that are in the advertisements and how they're addressing people, what audience they're looking for. I just find that fascinating. So I spent a lot of time doing that kind of research. The Chernobyl research itself is very disturbing. Really hard for me personally to work through, because I think of the power that we have in these, literal power plants, right? We can generate electricity, but also they're destructive forces. Sure, we're just trying to turn lights on, if you look at it that way, but we're also building bombs. And, look at what the Soviet military, right, apparatus is now being directed towards in that same spot, right? Ukraine, Chernobyl was in the news, right, when it melted down. And now again, when Putin tries to recapture it, it's very scary stuff to read and to dig into, even beyond just the number of people who died. So, so looking into that was, that's hard research, but also I feel important to understand what's out there and what we can do. And then also my research dove into comics and talking to Trina Robbins herself and reading all of her books, and digging into what it was like to try to be a woman drawing comics, in the 70s, 80s, breaking into that field. So really the research spanned a huge swath, and just doing all kinds of really, really intense reading and talking to people when I could.
Mm-hmm. And you just came off of all of this this book is remarkably timely. You're on the pulse. Do you find that having had the experience of writing this book, that your feelings about current events in Ukraine and Chernobyl and the prospect of biological warfare, do you have a different perspective on that having written this book, or are you coming at it with the same sense of apprehension than you would have before.
Yeah. I mean, I think this really takes us back to that question or the issue we were talking about in the beginning of having my passport ready, and the passports for everyone in my family. Yes. I look at what's happening in Ukraine and it's very sad. But also when I talk to people who are close to my family or my family themselves, right, who are connected there, it's like, I mean, it's Ukraine. We knew this was going to happen, right, in terms of or to say it's not so surprising that there's war again, right? It's a different sort of mentality. Sort of it's just a matter of when, not if it's going to happen, which is terrible to think about and say, but I guess it's maybe the way I was raised is to think about you're safe for now, but have your plan to move. And so that is sadly what what comes out. I will say one of the things that I got to research a lot was this cosmic ray station that the Soviet Union built out, and it becomes the hideout for Anna and Molly and Reza. And I look at that as sort of this retired Soviet, I don't know, like sort of monster that was left up on a mountain. And right. And literally there are like two people who actually still are there and working on it. And I think about things like that in a different way, and that there's all this abandoned apparatus. What is going to happen to it now that it's moving in and out of different hands? I mean, the computers that are up there on Mount Aragats are like, 1980s era, not as powerful as your cell phone. You're going to walk up there and see three.
Right. They're more Oregon Trail level.
Exactly. Right. The old Oregon Trail. And so like, what's going to happen to all of that stuff? Is it going to be repurposed it still could be a weapon, so what is going to happen to that? So I think more about that kind of stuff now in terms of those abandoned outposts, what's going to happen to those?
That's very interesting. Speaking of it, metaphorical abandoned outposts, I would love for you to talk a little bit about your own past lives, specifically that you've been—
That's a connection.
Right? That you've been a hedge fund manager and a spin instructor. I just need you to talk about that because that's something else.
That's something else. I mean, I will say that I have always been a writer and always been writing. And as an undergrad at Harvard, I took every writing class that I possibly could. And my dream was to write, and I wanted to just write full time. But I had all kinds of loans and it wasn't going to happen. I just couldn't afford it, right? I remember talking to my creative writing teacher about the starting salary at the New Yorker, right? Not, which would just like a dream when you're, maybe I could work there or even as, whatever, the mailroom. But I couldn't afford it. I couldn't do it. And so I had to, business pays. And so I found myself in the business world. You get caught up in that. And also, trading stocks, there's something very satisfying about knowing at the end of the day where you stand. Like I always do if I lost money or I made money. Writing a book, it's like 3 years before you know if anyone's going to buy it, right?
Yes.
And that's just talking about a publisher. We're not talking about, all of you guys out there listening. Like, are you going to buy my book? I don't know. I hope so. But, so it's years and years. And so there was something very satisfying about that. But every time I was supposed to be reading earnings reports or on these calls, I was like, finishing up a novel, thinking about this character or whatever. And I don't know, I was in my later mid 30s and I just sat down one day and I was like, what are you doing? Your heart is not in this. And, is this really what you want to look back on in 10 years and say you're still trading stocks, right? You're still, making investor presentations and trying to raise money. And the answer was no. And so it was like this moment of, I'm going to go for it. And I applied to a program at Grub Street, which is a writer's center in Boston. And I was accepted to this year-long novel incubator program with a very early draft of Bend in the Stars. And I just decided to go for it. And it's so crazy. I can't believe I did it, but I just closed down my business. I closed down everything I was doing because I was like, I've got to put it all on the line. And if I'm doing half and half still, I'll never really know if I could have done it. And I got to say, there's nothing like, shutting down a business and not having income to make you write than doing that. So I, wrote up a storm, and it was amazing. And then I had little, sort of little points that I wanted to pass along the way. So if at the end of that year I got an agent, I would keep going. And I did. I found Eve Adderman at WME, and she was amazing. She's like, keep going. We're going to, edit for another year. Give me a year. Okay. So we edited for another year. And then she said, at that point, I was like, look, I need to know if I made the worst decision of my life. Like, I have to, are you going to sell this book, or do I need to go back?
Spoiler, you did not.
I did not. But yeah, spoiler. So she went out and sold it. And and that started bending the stars. And then now I get to keep going.
It's so, so fabulous. And, in talking about your choices professionally, I mean, that resonates a lot with how you've written, as I alluded to before, how you've written Anna and Molly and Brysa, this idea of your identity, right? Who you are as a person. You're a writer, and you were a writer before you were a published writer. And I think that really, that makes in other words, I hear echoes of that experience in how you've portrayed those characters, and it makes those characters resonate with more authenticity and relatability. And it's just wonderful. So if there are people on this who haven't bought the book, you're making a mistake. You need to fix that mistake. You need to take the steps and not have regrets and purchase this book. I also wanted to ask you about you've done extensive with your podcast. You've done interviewing. You've done reviewing. And to what extent does all of that help you to write your own fiction?
I just love books, and I just love writers, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I love just talking to them, talking to you, right? Talking to people about books, book people. There's something about the ideas. I never felt this way about finance. I just want to be clear, right? Never sat down, was like, let's really dig into that earnings report. It never worked for me. But a book, I will sit down, right? And I can talk for hours about it. So I guess I just get that energy, particularly from talking to new authors. There's this excitement. And I really believe that the world is always changing, right? And I want to keep up with it somehow. And I feel like the older I get, the harder that is to do. But talking to new authors really, I just love, hearing about how the process is working and what they're doing and what they're thinking about. Some of the more established authors are still on that path, but not as much. If you talk to a new author who's just sold their book for the first time or just got an agent, you can hear a lot more about what it takes these days. And I find it so inspiring, and there's so much energy in it. And I feel the same way with the comic artists, right, that I'm also getting to work with now. There's just this energy in them that I love. I want to suck it up and put it in my book.
It's like a vitality that, if you could sell it in cups like this, business. No, it's wonderful. And I'm going to bring in a bunch of reader / listener questions. Wendy asks, did you have many strong female influences in your life growing up?
Hi, Wendy. Thank you so much to all of you who are sending in your questions. Bring them on. I love this. I always say it's like a dream when someone other than just my mom reads the book. Because it's true, right? Because it used to be just my mom, and then it would go in the drawer. But now, right? Yes, all kinds of strong women. My great aunts that I mentioned in the beginning who were telling me to make sure that I had the passports ready. Their sister was my grandmother, who died when I was very young, but they were very much, Rachel, get out there and, you get out there and get the good grades and make something of yourself, right? You can do this. Don't let anybody tell you can't type, they were those kinds of cheerleaders. And it was, amazing to have them there telling me, don't let the boys tell you different, right? Get out there. And, I used to run a lot of track, and, the boys would always say they were faster, and my aunt would be like, yeah, that's baloney. Toe the line, get out there and race them. And those are little things that people say to kids that really make a big difference, right? Because I always hear them. And I think that's why I write female characters too, is because I want other women and girls to see strong women and girls doing math, doing science, doing things that can change the world, or that they can even just, be out there trying something new.
On a very different note, Jerry asks, she says, your sparkling top matches your personality. Are you a science fiction reader?
Well, thank you. I love sequins, and I wish I got the chance to wear them more often. I mean, why not wear them every day? Am I a science fiction reader? Not so much, actually. I really read... I will read science fiction occasionally, but I tend towards, like, if you have to go walk into a bookstore and say, where are you going? Which aisle? I usually go to the fiction aisle. Although I love to look at, our 50 most popular books in this store, because I love to see what is selling in this store and what are people reading, because that's how you find books and authors that you never would have looked at before.
C asks about your writing style and work schedule and your relationship with your editors and collaboration. So what that looks like. And Joyce asks how you create your story and characters. Do you outline? Do characters begin to talk to you? So that those are two process-oriented questions.
Yeah, those are some big ones. How does the book get made? I write every single day. I try to write, or I should say 6 days a week. I write. I don't write on Saturday, and I read 7. And just try to get as many ideas as I can. I usually start with an idea for a book and have it mapped out in my head. And then I get started and it changes completely, completely. And I write probably 100 pages for every page that has appeared in Atomic Anna. I just write tons, and most of it is junk and terrible, but I am a strong believer in you just need to keep writing, that writer's block is more, I've heard other authors say this, and I believe it. Actually just interviewed Jennifer Egan last week, and she said this too, that writer's block is this fear of, bad writing. And you just got to get over it and write terribly in order to get to the good writing. So I do a lot of that terrible writing to get to the good writing. And I'm very lucky that I have an amazing agent and editor, Seema Mahanian at Grand Central, who has the patience, to say to me, and you hear this as a writer, you have to have thick skin in the sense that someone will say, so I'm glad you wrote those first 100 pages. Let's just cut them and start on page 101. And so that doesn't bother me ever. I'm never upset when someone says, these 50 pages didn't work. These 100 pages didn't work. Let's get to the real story because page 102 was good, right? Keep going on that. So you have to be able to say, all right, fine, just move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's not always so easy. So, so I think that's great.
But it's not personal, right? When someone's telling you they don't like your first 100 pages, they're not saying, I don't like you. They're not saying you have a bad idea. In fact, they're saying you have a great idea and you got to it on this page. Let's keep going. So I always try to sort of, remember that. You probably know this too, right? These first 5 ideas were terrible, but they got me to number 6. So
right.
Let's go with it.
Okay. Laura Beth has 3 great, equally dense questions. Question 1 is for Laura Beth. You're in the wings. You're an understudy. Number 1, has the state of current events prompted a new idea for a new novel? Number 2, what is your research and writing process? How has it changed from your debut to Atomic Anna? And number 3, what has been your favorite part of the Atomic Anna process? And on the flip side, the most difficult?
All right. So Jordana, what do you want me to start with?
That's a lot. Let's go bottom up. Let's talk about your favorite part of the Atomic Anna process and the hardest part.
Yeah. Let's see. I would say my favorite part was when I handed in this huge edit in August, and I felt like I finally wrapped my head around the book. There were so many pieces to write a time travel book, right? You're going back and forth in time and between the characters, the 3 voices. There was so much. And sometimes I sat there and I was like, oh my God, I don't know if my brain is big enough to make sense of all of this. and I have all these spreadsheets and written down and would go through this very careful formula to make sure it was all tracking. And then I finally handed it in August. Last August, this draft, and I called Seema and I was like, I did it. I finally did it. It came together. And I had danced on the beach. I was at the beach after this. And I just was like, yes, this moment when a book comes together. And I was pretty terrified before then because we were staring down pub date and it hadn't come together yet.
That's awesome. And have you changed your process from A Bend in the Stars to Atomic Anna?
No, I don't think it's changed. I mean, I still just write a ton and throw out a ton and, sort of stick to, see what's sticking and what's working. So not that different. Yeah, I don't know. I wish I had some bigger thoughts to share on that.
And Laura Beth wants to know if the state of current events has prompted a new idea for a new novel. No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. I mean, it's tough. I don't, I've never written for an audience or for a particular, to an event in that sense, like to sell a book, because I'm of the mind that just doesn't work. You have to write what you know or what's in your heart. And if you're trying to reach an audience, then you're following someone else's ideas and dreams and not your own. So I'm not inspired by that. And actually I am already very deep into a novel that is on a different subject. So we'll see. I'm not going to write to what's happening in Ukraine right now.
Do you feel comfortable talking about what your next project is?
What is coming?
Is it close to it? Yeah.
I will say that it is around 9/11, and I was down there when it happened and lost a childhood friend, and so I felt like it was time to be writing about that. So not memoir, still fiction. Yeah, not going to memoir.
Okay.
No. Some people do that beautifully, but not me.
Yeah. People want to know where they can find your podcast.
Oh, you can find my podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. So it's Debut Spotlight with Rachel Barenbaum. So if you listen on Apple or Podbean or wherever you might listen, you'll find me.
Okay, great. And Laura wants to know if you have authors, not otters, that you automatically purchase, and what books, any books that you want to recommend right now or debuts you want to highlight.
Yes, I love this question. I love talking about other authors and their books because there's so much good stuff out there. And I actually came prepared for this question. So you just made my day asking. Thanks,
Laura.
Thanks, Laura. Of course, this is making my day talking about Atomic Anna. But I'll read anything that anybody writes. There's no particular author that, I just read everything I can. But I will say, so Lisa Barr just had her book come out, Woman on Fire. I don't know if you've read that, but that's great about, it's amazing look at Nazi art looting and theft. And then I think you guys had Gall Beckerman came on, The Quiet Before. Yes, also brilliant. And I read his first book as part of my research. I was very excited to see that coming out too. So I guess that shows you the I read a little bit of everything coming out and find all those very interesting.
Lori wants to know, in reference to changing history, if you're politically engaged, and if so, how. I know that that may be a minefield of an answer that you may want to cushion.
Yeah,
or not answer at all. So.
Engaged. I'm not sure. What do you think that means?
I suppose that as someone who has written amply about turning the tide of history, do you ever feel that impetus in yourself? Do you ever feel that you want to, whether it's being an activist, whether it's getting out the vote, or in terms of particular issues of, attempting to change the tide of history in the life that you're living? Sorry, Gloria, to put words in your mouth. Maybe that's not what you meant at all. Sorry.
Okay. I would say that I'm not, I'm not really a politician per se, but I am actually running for town meeting in Brookline right now.
Good for you.
I want to make Brookline more bikeable, right?
I love that.
So I'm working on that, and feel very strongly about there are a lot of racist and anti-Semitic issues going on in our schools right now in Brookline that I do feel very strongly about and want to get involved with. And again, I want to help lift up voices of the next generation, the kids that are getting involved and who want to step up and talk to us grownups about what it's like to be in a high school, with swastikas popping up every day, or, where there are very few, if any, Black kids in the advanced math classes. Those sorts of issues. That is our future right there in those high schools. That's what those kids are dealing with, the mental health issues coming out of COVID, and we need to be hearing them. And so I am running to help give them a voice. And so I don't know if that's changing the tide of history in the grand scale that I like my characters to do, but in my tiny little world, I'm doing a tiny little bit.
Gloria's happy with that answer.
Good.
So Sophie wants to know, is getting ready to run uniquely Jewish rather than a European or an Eastern European experience? Historically, she points out European borders have been, she says, withdrawn, but I would say redrawn for centuries, and many people other than just Jews have had to run.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great point. I don't know. I can only speak to my experience as the Jewish family that came from there. And I will say that living in America, we have this crazy land. We're like landlocked, right? There's sort of on either side, we have oceans. We don't have these small borders, and we're a huge amount of land. So it's not like we're a small European country, right? Or it's just the state of Massachusetts or Pennsylvania, right? Versus Texas or something, right? Right now we're still a union of 50 states. And so I think it's very different to live here, grow up here, and to see this as your worldview versus being in a place where you have lots of small countries.
Jay wants to know if you see parallels between Atomic Anna and Station 11.
I love that. Station 11. In terms of questioning what we want our future to be, for sure, right? And how do you want to, that book really concentrates on a pandemic and takes you forwards and backwards as, the main character is going back and forth. But, those big questions of, what are we going to do with science, with progress, and how do you sort of build the world around you? I think that Emily St. John Mandel does beautifully, and I'm honored that you would ask if I see parallels, because I do. And also V.E. Schwab's Addie LaRue. I look to that one a lot also as inspiration, and this idea of what choices are you making? What part of your soul are you willing to sell for your future?
And one last question.
Already?
I know. I've had a great time talking to you.
Amazing.
Sandra, just for the people who are watching, Rachel and I both talked about how there should be a Jewish geography component to all of these sessions, about how there's inevitably someone who knows somebody. So Sandra says, "Hi, Rachel. I do remember you as a fine competitive runner in high school. Do you continue to run, and does it help you in your creative process?"
Oh, hello, Sandra. I wonder which one that is.
Levison.
Oh, yes. So I think I'm talking to Julie's mom. Yes, I still run. I loved it. And I just find it as a great way to, after, if I can't think about what to write next, or I can't sleep, or like whatever, I run. So yes, I run all the time, and I still do sprint triathlons. I love it. And I'm still running. So
that's so fabulous. And yes, she is Julie's mom.
I love Jewish geography. Hello.
And that brings us full circle. But I want to thank you so much for coming on today. It's such a pleasure to talk to you and to read your books. Again, everyone pre-order, get it through the link. Marjorie, I'm sure, put it in the chat. You need to read this book. You need to read her other book, but Atomic Anna is so much fun. And it's been such a great time talking to you. Thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Marjorie, for letting me come on and talk to her.
Thank you so much, Jordana, Marjorie. This has been amazing. Everyone listening, thank you.
Great. Well, I came back to thank both of you. Jordana, wonderful. Rachel, absolutely wonderful. We all enjoyed it. A lot of great comments, a lot of great old-time Jewish geography coming in as usual, which is so much fun. I just want to tell everybody listening, we have Gal Beckerman. Rachel mentioned Gal Beckerman. We actually have him next week, Tuesday the 29th.
So there we go.
Website, or maybe that's exactly right. He's going to speak about that book with New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg. So I think we can have our tech person put it in the chat, or please look at our website and sign up. Now, next week, we have our very last Women on the Move for a few months until we start up again. And we have Tessa Hadley, who's a British author, and it's going to be absolutely wonderful as well. And we hope to see all of you on next week. And Rachel, thank you. And good luck with this book. This is a hit.
Thank you.
Bestseller.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Bye, everyone.
Okay.